the crystalline archways of the grand conclave hall, impossibly tall and refracting the dim, violet light of the distant primary star into dazzling, oppressive spectra, seemed to absorb all sound, leaving only the faint, rhythmic thrum of the planetary core stabilizers vibrating beneath the obsidian floor. Elder Sensor Krellin shifted his weight on the suspended dais, the movement barely registered by the myriad optical sensors arrayed throughout the chamber. Yet his internal neuronetwork pulsed with a deep, systemic unease that mirrored the political tremor running through the hegemonic council. Below him, representatives of the 3013th Coalition, the Cathar, the Cygnian Directorate, the silent myrmidons of Xylos, were engaged in a low-frequency discourse, a complex symphony of pheromonal signals and modulated sonic bursts that spoke of panic disguised as prudent strategy. They were discussing the Terran anomaly, the sudden, inexplicable insertion of a single vessel into the outer rim of the contested Glacis sector, a sector which, by millennia of established treaty and calculated risk assessment, should have remained the undisputed domain of the hegemony. Krellin focused his primary visual receptors on the holographic projection suspended at the nexus of the chamber, a rudimentary schematic of the incoming vessel, rendered from long-range telemetry data captured during its near-instantaneous transit across the intersector void. It was small, almost insultingly so, a stubby metallic dart against the backdrop of the Coalition's massive, kilometer-spanning dreadnoughts and the elegant, organically grown cruisers of the Cygnian fleets. Yet within that smallness resided the source of the hegemony's burgeoning systemic dread. The readings were contradictory, defying known physics of propulsion, shielding, and energy containment. The vessel, designated Odyssey by the Terran nomenclature recovered from faint, intercepted broadcast fragments, was emitting residual gravitational distortions consistent with forces orders of magnitude beyond what its mass suggested, and its energy signature was a chaotic, beautiful scream that seemed to actively resist interpretation by the Coalition's most sophisticated analytical matrices. "The data remains inconclusive, esteemed censor," buzzed Ambassador Vrix of the Cathar, his chitinous carapace vibrating rapidly, indicating a heightened state of diplomatic agitation. Vrix leaned forward, his mandated translator emitting a sharp, precise articulation of the Coalition's standard dialect. "Inconclusive is unacceptable when confronting a potential singularity event. We have dispatched the 9th Deterrence Flotilla. Their orders are clear: containment, quarantine, and, if necessary, termination of the intrusive element. Why do we continue to deliberate when immediate, decisive force is the only logical recourse against an uninvited incursion?" A soft, resonant tone filled the air, emanating from the Zalosian representative, a being whose physical form was largely obscured by a shimmering field of controlled plasma, rendering them less a physical entity and more a locus of pure, modulated thought. "Force is the recourse of the primitive, Ambassador. The hegemony values understanding before destruction. To deploy the deterrence flotilla based on incomplete data is to invite the very chaos we seek to contain. Consider the source, the Terrans. They are nascent. Their civilization barely spans 3 centuries of interstellar capability. Their technology, by our metrics, remains barbaric, combustion, crude fission reactions, reliance on volatile chemical propellants for their initial expansionist phases. Why would such a species field a vessel capable of defying established laws of spacetime?" Krellin steepled his manipulators, the polished obsidian reflecting the anxious faces of the gathered delegates. The Zalosian spoke a profound truth, yet it felt incomplete, a comfortable falsehood designed to lull them into strategic complacency. It was precisely the discrepancy between the Terrans' known developmental trajectory and the impossible capabilities displayed by the Odyssey that fueled the hegemony's fear. The vessel had bypassed established warp gates, ignoring trillions of meticulously catalogued navigational beacons, simply appearing where it should not have been, radiating an energy signature that suggested power reserves capable of sustaining a small star. "The logical deduction," Krellin projected, his voice layered with the gravitas of millennia of stewardship, "is not that the Terrans are unexpectedly advanced, but that their arrival represents a systemic failure in our own predictive models regarding species capable of rapid, nonlinear technological ascent. They are an outlier of terrifying magnitude. Ambassador Vrix, the 9th Flotilla moves too slowly. Their jump coordinates are predictable, their engagement protocols standardized. If the Odyssey is what the sense Res imply, a genuine discontinuity. A full-spectrum engagement involving even a fraction of the flotilla risks catastrophic collateral damage to the glacis nexus infrastructure. We require more data, and we require a less martial interface. A sigh, almost imperceptible, escaped the Cygnian delegate Lyrosol. The Cygnians were the hegemony's diplomats, artists of subtle coercion and protracted negotiation. Censor, the Terrans have made a single communication since establishing their position. It was not a threat, nor a demand. It was a data packet containing complex mathematical proofs regarding local gravitational anomalies, followed by a simple, declarative statement. We await discourse regarding resource parity. Resource parity? Vrix sputtered, the vibration in his carapace increasing into a near shudder. They demand negotiation over resources they have no legitimate claim to, using a vessel that breaks reality as their opening gambit. This is not diplomacy. It is a veiled threat of annexation. They mock us with their impossible ship and then demand tribute. Krellin felt a cold, internal pressure, the pressure of existential threat. The hegemony was built on ordered expansion, the slow, systematic integration of lesser species into a galactic framework that prioritized stability over innovation. Humanity was not fitting the framework. They were an irreducible constant in an equation that suddenly refused to balance. Mockery implies intent. Intent requires a level of understanding of our societal structure we have not yet confirmed they possess. We must approach this from the perspective of danger, not insult. If they possess the means to navigate space in such a manner, they possess the means to render this entire sector uninhabitable without warning or effort. Therefore, the immediate priority is establishing the Terran ethical baseline. What drives them? The Xylosian signal intensified, conveying complex philosophical apprehension. Their records show a history of brutal self-conflict spanning millennia. They achieved planetary unification only in the last Terran century. Their ethics, as recorded in their primitive transmissions, are a tapestry of self-sacrifice interwoven with astonishing casual cruelty. They do not adhere to the unified, logical altruism that defines stable galactic powers. They are motivated by internal contradictions. This is the greatest danger, unpredictability rooted in chaotic emotional drivers. Krellin agreed internally. The hegemony preferred adversaries whose motivations were legible: territory, resources, ideological dominance. The Terrans seemed driven by something far more volatile, an innate, stubborn refusal to yield, even in the face of overwhelming existential disparities. They were building empires based on emotion, a concept the hegemony had long relegated to the nursery myths of pre-spaceflight cultures. We will send an envoy, Krellin decreed, the decision locking into place with the finality of gravitational collapse. Not a fleet delegation, not a military contingent. A single vessel, minimally armed, carrying only diplomatic instrumentation and a secure, encrypted channel. Ambassador Lyrosol, your species excels in the delicate art of parsing irrationality. You will lead the mission. You will make contact. Lyrosol's response was immediate, resonating with a strange mixture of duty and profound professional apprehension. Censor, I accept the mandate. However, I must emphasize the inherent risk. If the Odyssey is truly a precursor to a hostile action, my vessel, the Lexicon, will be vaporized before our primary hailing sequence completes. We would gain nothing but confirmation of our strategic demise. Precisely, Ambassador. If they are hostile, we learn the manner of our demise, which provides crucial data for the deterrence flotilla's revised targeting algorithms. If they are not hostile, we gain the necessary psychological framework to negotiate with a force that clearly views conventional power structures as irrelevant. Prepare the Lexicon. You depart on the next solar cycle. The silence that descended upon the conclave hall was heavy, filled with the unspoken calculations of species balancing on the knife edge of a new, terrifying reality. The hegemony, masters of galactic order for epochs, were now forced to supplicate, or at least, to engage in earnest dialogue with a species whose entire existence seemed predicated on ignoring the rules everyone else had learned to live by. They were about to meet the Terrans, and the fear was palpable, a cold, metallic taste lingering even in the filtered air of the ancient chamber. The journey to the glacis sector was an exercise in constrained speed, the Lexicon utilizing established, but highly refined, hegemony warp conduits to maintain a respectable velocity without wasting critical energy reserves. Lyrosol stood in the bridge nexus, surrounded by the gentle glow of Instrum. Entation screens that mapped the flow of hyperspace currents. Her consciousness was partially diffused across the ship systems, allowing her to perceive the environmental stress, the energy fluctuations, and the precise temporal displacement with crystalline clarity. She was a mind accustomed to the slow, deliberate unfolding of galactic time, and the presence of the Terran vessel, static, defiant, and utterly foreign, was an abrupt, jarring intrusion. As the lexicon decelerated from transit velocity, dropping into real space proximity, the Odyssey dominated the forward visual field. It was even more unsettling up close. The schematic had been misleadingly simple. In reality, the hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, a matte, deep gray that hinted at density beyond comprehension. There were no visible weapon emplacements, no obvious maneuvering thrusters, no ports or seams indicating conventional assembly. It looked less like a constructed machine, and more like a naturally occurring, immensely dense shard of space debris that had somehow decided to adopt directional motion. "Proximity stabilization nominal," reported Navigator Vihor, his voice a low, almost musical string of harmonics. "We are holding at the mandated contact distance of 100,000 kilometers. Their gravitational wake is persistent. It feels less like a mass signature and more like a persistent tear in the local continuum." Lyrasol focused her perception outward, bypassing the ship's optical sensors to probe the energy field surrounding the Terran vessel. The field wasn't shielding in the conventional sense. No refractive layer, no active deflection matrix. It was a stabilization field, an energetic envelope designed not to repel incoming energy, but to hold the vessel's own impossible physics in check relative to local spacetime. It was a cage built by the ship itself, to keep from tearing reality apart simply by existing. "Transmit the primary diplomatic cipher," Lyrasol commanded, her tone measured, projecting calm where her internal processing indicated rising alarm. "Begin with the standard hegemony overture, acknowledgement of incursion, request for identification, and declaration of intent to commence dialogue under the Treaty of Silent Accord." The lexicon broadcasted the complex, mathematically layered greeting, a signal designed to demonstrate sophistication and peaceful intent across diverse forms of communication: visual, sonic, subetheric. For a measured duration, 3 full solar minutes, a period calculated to induce maximum diplomatic tension in an established power, there was absolute silence from the Odyssey. Then the response came. It was not a structured signal. It was a direct, unfiltered burst of electromagnetic energy, overlaid with structured data packets that bypassed the lexicon's external decoding matrices and flooded the primary communication core directly. The vessel had simply opened a back door, an act of technological penetration so casual it implied utter contempt for standard security protocols. The data streamed across Lyrasol's internal displays, overwhelming the delicate Zalosian parsing algorithms. It was dense, complex, and terrifyingly organized. It wasn't a message. It was a data dump of Terran civilization's entire recorded history, compressed and prioritized for maximum psychological impact. "Ambassador, the incoming transmission is massive," Vihor projected, sounding genuinely distressed. "It's not a response, it's a data flood. They are forcing unstructured information into our core processors." Lyrasol, however, was already filtering the deluge. The Zalosian mind was built for pattern recognition across vast datasets, capable of finding coherence in noise that would paralyze lesser intelligences. She saw the history unfold: the brutal unification wars, the environmental collapse, the desperate, violent scramble for energy and space. She saw the astonishing leaps in theoretical physics achieved only in the last few centuries, discoveries made in bursts of desperate innovation born from near-extinction scenarios. And then, she saw the weaponry. Not the energy dispersal arrays one would expect, but something far more disconcerting. Theoretical schematics for temporal displacement weaponry, blueprints for self-replicating nanomachine swarms capable of systemic biodegradation, and most chillingly, the fundamental theoretical framework for the ship itself. A method of manipulating vacuum energy density to create localized, temporary distortions of gravitational constants, essentially bending the local speed of light to their will. "They are not advanced," Lyrasol murmured, her voice barely a whisper across the bridge. "They are dangerous. Their entire civilization is a monument to overcoming near-certain self-destruction through sheer, focused willpower. The vessel is not a weapon of war. It is a highly refined survival tool designed to breach any environment instantaneously." regardless of conventional constraints. A single, clear audio channel opened, bypassing all encryption and modulation, a raw human voice. Male, calm, devoid of inflection, yet carrying an inherent gravity that transcended language. It was the voice of a being completely certain of its position. Hegemony delegation. We acknowledge receipt of your standard greeting protocols. Our designation is Terran Diplomatic Corps. We do not recognize the Treaty of Silent Accord as it was not ratified by the Unified Terran Directorate. We are prepared to discuss resource parity. Our vessel is not a threat display. It is a necessary component of our current propulsion system. If you have prepared an appropriate diplomatic countersignal, transmit it now. If you have prepared a military response, we advise against activation. Your current energy output signatures are being logged. The sheer audacity of the statement, dismissing millennia of hegemonic law with a single sentence and then offering a casual warning about logging weapon signatures, was breathtaking. Vihor recoiled slightly. Ambassador, they are referencing our primary energy dispersal arrays as current energy output signatures. They analyzed our tactical readiness profile during the data exchange. Lyrasol felt a surge of cold intellectual admiration fighting against ingrained diplomatic caution. The hegemony relied on layers of obfuscation, on the slow reveal of capability. The Terrans operated on immediate, brutal transparency. They were showing their hand, but their hand held cards the Coalition could not even name. Transmit our primary countersignal, Lyrasol ordered, reasserting control. But strip away all diplomatic euphemisms. We will speak their language, directness filtered through rigorous logic. State that the Coalition demands an explanation for the instantaneous circumvention of established interstellar navigation protocols and the violation of Glacis sector sovereignty. Offer provisional safe harbor in exchange for immediate cessation of non-sanctioned energy emission. The lexicon sent the revised message. Again, the wait was agonizingly brief. The Terran response was instantaneous, a single text packet that conveyed a universe of difference in philosophy. Sovereignty is a concept derived from territorial control and defense capability. We have demonstrated superior capability for defense and transit in this locale. We require access to the Iridium-7 mining belt for necessary isotopic stabilization of our primary drive core. We offer the following exchange for unrestrained access. One compressed data package detailing 3 Terran breakthroughs in sustainable planetary terraforming, and exclusive rights to observe our primary drive system for a period of 1 solar cycle, under secure remote monitoring. The audacity escalated into something approaching strategic arrogance. They weren't asking for a seat at the table. They were stating the terms of the engagement, leveraging their impossible ship as the bargaining chip. Iridium-7, a resource the hegemony deemed too unstable for sustained extraction, hoarding it for theoretical large-scale terraforming projects centuries hence. For the Terrans, it was apparently a matter of immediate fuel requirements. Lyrasol leaned close to the main console, her optical sensors narrowing. Vihor, analyze the propulsion data they sent. Focus on the energy required to maintain that gravitational envelope versus the projected output of a single fusion reactor, even a maximally efficient one. I need to know if their demand for Iridium-7 is genuine necessity or simply a pretext for establishing control. Vihor's processing streams ran hot, his internal fans whining under the strain. The analysis took several agonizing minutes, the void between the ships stretching like an accusation. Ambassador, the energy signature of the Odyssey is not derived from conventional fusion or even antimatter annihilation. It appears they are drawing the energy required to warp spacetime directly from the quantum foam itself. It is a controlled zero-point energy tap, refined to an efficiency we have only ever dreamed of in theoretical physics. The Iridium-7 is not for fueling the drive. It is likely a catalyst or a stabilizing agent for the extraction process. They don't need the resource as much as they require a stable medium to perform their impossible physics. This changed everything. If they could tap the vacuum for energy, they were not simply ahead of the hegemony. They were operating in a different stratum of physical understanding. The 9th Deterrence Flotilla, poised kilometers away in a hidden staging orbit, was preparing kinetic weaponry and antimatter torpedoes against an opponent whose primary defense was likely the ability to delete the entire staging area from causality. Sensor Krellin must be informed immediately, Lyrasol stated, making a decision that bypassed standard protocol entirely. Inform the HEG. Imani command, the Terran vessel is not simply advanced. It is fundamentally incompatible with our current understanding of applied physics. Recommend immediate, non-military de-escalation. We are not negotiating with a rival empire. We are negotiating with a physical constant that refuses to obey our established mathematics. She initiated the secure, high-priority burst transmission back to the Conclave, detailing the propulsion analysis and the Terran demands. While the message traveled, Lyrosol prepared the direct response to the Odyssey. She would not send data. She would send a declaration of intellectual parity, a risky gambit predicated on the assumption that the Terrans valued competence over obedience. To the Terran diplomatic corps, Lyrosol projected, modulating her voice with a carefully calibrated measure of respect bordering on awe, a tone designed to appeal to a species that seemed motivated by recognition of inherent strength. The Coalition acknowledges the technical superiority of your propulsion methods as indicated by the data packets transmitted. We recognize the complexity of your energy stabilization matrix. Your request regarding Iridium-7 is noted. However, the concept of resource parity requires a shared framework of value. The hegemony values stability and predictable growth above raw energy access. To exchange established, functional terraforming methodologies for a single localized resource is unbalanced for the hegemony. Propose an alternative exchange. Grant us access to the schematics for the stabilization matrix, a purely theoretical curiosity for our research division, not operational implementation, in exchange for controlled, shared access to the Iridium-7 belt for a duration of 3 hegemony cycles with full oversight. The response was faster this time, almost immediate, suggesting the Terran command structure was lean and responsive. Zalosian Diplomatic Unit, designation noted. Your species demonstrates appropriate pattern recognition regarding applied physics. We understand your caution regarding instability. We do not offer our core stabilization matrix, as its operation is intrinsically linked to human neurophysical integration and would be functionally useless or destructive to non-integrated organic systems. However, the energy conservation principles utilized in the auxiliary thermal regulators are transferable. We offer the auxiliary thermal regulator schematics and 3 additional non-military application breakthroughs: the principles of targeted cellular regeneration, advanced atmospheric filtering, and frictionless magnetic levitation, in exchange for the Iridium-7 access with hegemony observation. We trust this revised offer meets your perceived valuation, stability versus innovation. Lyrosol felt a profound stillness settle over her. They had conceded the point on their core technology, admitting it was tied to their biology, a chilling glimpse into their integration with their vessels, but offered revolutionary advancements in disparate fields that would dramatically increase the quality of life across numerous coalition worlds. They were not conquerors seeking resources. They were pioneers seeking the specific raw material necessary for their unique advancement, and in return, they offered gifts of civilization. This was not the aggressive, expansionist threat the censors had feared. This was a pragmatic, almost brutally ethical exchange predicated on mutual, if asymmetrical, benefit. Humans, in their chaotic history, had learned the hard lesson of self-destruction. They offered solutions to problems the hegemony hadn't even realized it possessed, simply because their survival depended on solving them. Vihor, Lyrosol whispered, all coloring her synthesized tones. Prepare the preliminary acceptance protocols. We proceed with the exchange. We must see the schematics for the cellular regeneration. The myrmidons of Xylos suffer from latent systemic degradation. This knowledge could save their entire caste structure. Back in the Grand Conclave Hall, the transmission from Lyrosol had been received with a mixture of profound relief and emergent political maneuvering. Censor Krellin watched the status projections as the tentative agreement formed, the looming threat of a catastrophic kinetic exchange receding like a bad dream. They offered regeneration technology, stated Delegate Zinter of the Signian Directorate, his tone laced with disbelief. Technology that, by all existing metrics, should be centuries away from sentient application. They traded theoretical physics for tangible improvements in biological viability. It confirms the analysis, Krellin responded, pacing the dais slowly, the movement now deliberate, measured, reclaiming authority. The Terrans prioritize survival and pragmatic advancement over territorial dominance. Their internal history is a blueprint for necessity breeding innovation. They do not waste resources fighting wars they cannot win. They focus on acquiring the means to never be in a position where they cannot win. Ambassador Vrix of the Cathar, whose species thrived on aggressive resource acquisition, was visibly struggling to reconcile this input with his ingrained worldview. But the Iridium-7, it is vital for the future phase transition projects of the Cathar mining consortiums. Why would they require our catalyst material for their auxiliary systems? Because, Ambassador, Krellin said, pausing, letting the implication settle heavily in the silence. Their primary drive, the one that violates causality, may be fundamentally unstable in an environment lacking trace elements indigenous to their home star system. They are not trying to conquer the Glacis sector. They are merely trying to refuel a dangerously powerful engine so they can leave it. They are nomads, albeit nomads riding reality-bending technology. The Xylosian presence sent a pulse of acknowledgement, one suggesting deep contemplation. Their ethics, Censor, are based on reciprocity driven by immediate need. If we satisfy their need, they satisfy ours with disproportionate value. This is a highly functional, if alien, system of diplomacy. It relies on honesty in the statement of need. Krellin nodded. And that honesty is their greatest shield. A species that openly admits its weaknesses and its immediate dependencies is a species we can calculate. The initial fear was of an unknown, unpredictable predator. What we are encountering is an individual incredibly powerful, but bound by its own physical requirements. The political maneuvering began instantly. The hegemony's immediate concern shifted from defense to strategic acquisition. If Terran regenerative technology could stabilize the Myrmidons, the coalition gained an invaluable political asset, binding the Xylosians closer to the hegemony structure. If the Cathar secured favorable long-term contracts for Iridium-7 extraction utilizing the Terran-agreed stabilization period, their economic leverage would increase. We must establish a permanent diplomatic liaison on the Odyssey, Krellin stated, his decision final. Lyrosol has proven uniquely suited to this interface. She navigated the initial contact without provoking a catastrophic response, something our military planners were clearly incapable of achieving. I will recall the 9th Deterrence Flotilla, effective immediately, and retask them as logistical support and observation vessels under the guise of escorting the Terran resource gathering operation. We frame this as a concession, a gesture of goodwill, rather than a retreat. The Council agreed. The concept of being outmaneuvered by superior physics rather than superior firepower was a humiliation they could digest, provided it led to tangible gains. The immediate threat was neutralized, replaced by an opportunity for profound technological advancement. Humanity, the assumed barbarian at the gate, had proven to be the unexpected purveyor of miracles, leveraging their single, terrifying ship to gain access to a crucial local resource. For the next several standard cycles, the interaction proceeded with a tense, carefully choreographed equilibrium. The Odyssey remained motionless, an inert monument to power, while a small, dedicated contingent of Cathar and hegemony resource gatherers, escorted by the newly retasked flotilla, established proximity operations around the Iridium-7 belt adjacent to the Terran vessel. Lyrosol remained aboard the Lexicon, maintaining the communication bridge, observing the human interface team, which consisted of a single individual transmitted via a tight beam communications link, projected as a moderately detailed holographic avatar onto the Lexicon's diplomatic receiving chamber. The human representative, designated Dr. Aris Thorne, was unremarkable in appearance, bipedal, symmetrical, clad in utilitarian gray fabric. His mannerisms were economical, his voice consistent with the initial transmission, calm, logical, yet possessed of an underlying current of focused intensity. Dr. Thorne, Lyrosol began during their third formal exchange, projecting diplomatic reserve. The data packets concerning cellular regeneration are under intensive review. The principles are sound, yet the application appears to require highly specialized, non-standard bioscaffolding matrices. Can you elaborate on the necessity of the substrate you designated biopolymer 7 delta? Thorne's holographic eyes flickered once, indicating engagement. Ambassador Lyrosol, the substrate is required because Terran biology is inherently unstable on a microscale. Our evolutionary path involved near-total environmental collapse multiple times. Our cellular division contains a higher incidence of stochastic error compared to your own species, stable developmental vectors. The 7 delta matrix acts as a high-fidelity template, ensuring the copied structure adhere. Ease to the ideal human genomic sequence, bypassing those accumulated errors. Lyrosol processed this with mounting astonishment. You are saying that your inherent biological programming carries significant structural flaws, and you must employ complex external technology simply to maintain the intended form of your species. That is an accurate, if clinically phrased, summary of the Terran condition, Thorne confirmed. We do not possess the inherent longevity or self-correction mechanisms common to the established powers. We must innovate aggressively to compensate for our foundational fragility. Your species, by contrast, appears to possess robust natural resilience. Your primary challenge seems to be the management of established stability, political stagnation, resource distribution across vast, non-critical territories. Our challenge is continuing to exist. The contrast was stark. The hegemony worried about the slow decay of empires. The Terrans worried about the rapid decay of the individual cell. And your primary drive? Lyrosol pressed, needing to understand the vessel that had brought them here. If it requires iridium-7 for stabilization, what happens if the supply is interrupted? Thorne's projection remained perfectly still. If the supply is interrupted during a transition, the localized gravitational distortion field collapses without proper dampening. The vessel and its immediate surroundings would undergo spontaneous, rapid-phase transition into an extremely high-density state. Effectively, it becomes a microscopic black hole, collapsing the local spacetime manifold. This is why we prioritized resource acquisition over prolonged diplomatic engagement. We cannot risk systemic failure near populated regions. The danger was not malice. It was unavoidable physics tied to their specific survival needs. The vessel was a ticking, reality-warping bomb that needed precise fuel to remain a navigable craft. This confirmed Krellin's political strategy. The Terrans were not seeking conquest. They were seeking highly specific maintenance components for their highly advanced, yet fundamentally fragile, means of travel. They were dangerous not because they wanted to hurt the hegemony, but because they were inherently difficult to coexist with due to the very nature of their technology. The exchange continued for several more cycles. The hegemony provided the observational data on the thermal regulators and received the promised breakthroughs. The political atmosphere within the conclave shifted from terror to calculated assimilation. Humanity was not a rival. They were a technological singularity whose instability made them predictable partners, provided their immediate needs were met. Then the dynamic shattered. The disturbance did not originate from the Odyssey. It originated from the perimeter of the Glacis sector, deep within the dark, unmapped void that separated the hegemony's influence from the older, largely dormant galactic core. Lyrosol was reviewing the raw observational logs from the hegemony escort fleet, the retasked 9th Flotilla, when the first anomaly registered. It was not a conventional sensor spike. It was an absence of signal, a sudden, profound vacuum in the background cosmic radiation mapping that the flotilla used for deep navigation. Vihor cross-referenced the deep space telemetry logs with the Odyssey's passive sensor reports, Lyrosol commanded, her professional calm momentarily pierced by a raw urgency. Ambassador, the Odyssey has gone entirely silent on all our passive monitoring frequencies, Vihor reported. Their primary gravity distortion field is still present, but the output signature has flattened. It's no longer actively drawing energy. They appear to be dormant or in standby mode. And the void anomaly. Vihor projected a three-dimensional map of the distant periphery. Where there had been the expected whisper of background energy and dark matter drift, there was now a clean, impossibly vast sphere of absolute null reading, expanding slowly, consuming the observational data stream. It is not an energy signature, Ambassador, Vihor stated, his harmonics tight with fear. It is a lack of information. The sensor photons are not being reflected, absorbed, or refracted. They are simply ceasing to exist within that boundary. It is a distortion of observational probability. Lyrosol immediately broadcast a high-priority, encrypted alert back to Sensor Krellin, bypassing the usual diplomatic formality. Urgent, unforeseen external variable introduced to Glacis sector. A massive informational null zone is expanding from the galactic periphery. The Terran vessel, the Odyssey, appears to have entered a protective standby mode coincident with this event, requesting immediate status update on the Terran data exchange regarding unforeseen external threats. The response from Krellin was delayed, strained. The hegemony command was clearly grappling with a situation entirely outside their accumulated threat assessment matrices. Lyrosol, the Terran data package contained one final unprompted segment, flagged as pre-departure contextual data. We assumed it was supplementary background noise regarding their home system wars. It detailed a defensive strategy classified as contingency theta. The core concept involves a rapid, non-linear energy signature intended to repel entities of a higher physical order. We dismissed it as evolutionary hyperbole. The data referenced entities that utilize the vacuum structure itself as a medium of attack, a process they termed causal dissolution. Causal dissolution, Lyrosol repeated, tasting the alien concept. It implied an enemy capable of erasing existence not through explosion, but through the simple, untraceable removal of the possibility of that existence having occurred. The Odyssey is not here for Iridium 7, Lyrosol realized with chilling clarity. It was running low on stabilizing elements, yes, but it was stationed here. It was in the safest location it could reach before critical failure, a location buffered by hegemony infrastructure and energy readings that masked its own instability. It came here to hide. Hide from what, Ambassador? Krellin's voice crackled with sudden, raw fear. From the very thing that is now arriving, Lyrosol replied, watching the expanding null sphere consume more distant sensor relays. The Terrans did not provoke a war with the hegemony, they fled a war with something else, and by involving us, they have forced us into the line of fire. As the lexicon attempted to gather more precise readings on the expanding void, the Odyssey suddenly reactivated. It was not the slow ramp-up of energy characteristic of a standard system ignition. It was an instantaneous, blinding flare of output that surpassed every previous reading by several orders of magnitude. The gravitational distortion field surrounding the Terran ship snapped into existence, not as a passive bubble, but as a dynamic, active barrier pushing against the encroaching void. The Terran audio channel opened again, the voice of Dr. Thorne now stripped of its previous calm and imbued with an unmistakable, grinding determination. It was the sound of a species preparing for its final, necessary confrontation. Hegemony designation Lyrosol, Coalition Command. We apologize for the omission in initial disclosure. We required immediate stability before engaging in existential threat assessment. The entity approaching is designated the Harvester. It does not engage in warfare, it consumes organized energy states. Our primary drive system, the one you admired, is the only known technology capable of directly countering its method of attack. We were attempting to stabilize long enough to deploy a sufficient countermeasure, but their advance was accelerated. Thorne's avatar shifted slightly, for the first time displaying something akin to exertion. The Iridium 7 was not for us. It was for the necessary resonance frequency required to power the countermeasure we will deploy. The hegemony's proximity was accidental, but now providential. We require the full energy output of your entire escort fleet, the 9th Flotilla, channeled into our primary reactor core in precisely 180 standard seconds. This will overload our containment fields, but it will generate the necessary waveform to push back the Harvester beyond this system's gravitational influence. The request was suicidal, requiring the hegemony to temporarily disable their only armed defense against the Terran vessel, rendering themselves utterly defenseless, and hand over all available power to the alien ship that had just admitted its entire reason for being near them was to hide. Dr. Thorne, Lyrosol responded, her voice firm despite the internal chaos radiating from the bridge crew. To surrender the flotilla's power output is to expose this entire sector to your own vessel, should your countermeasure fail. We are being asked to trust a species whose own history suggests inherent unreliability in complex, long-term planning. Ambassador, look at the data. We are the species that survived total self-annihilation across 3 separate historical epochs. Our planning is based on the absolute certainty that failure means extinction. Trust is not required. Calculation is sufficient. If we fail to deploy this pulse, the Harvester will consume this sector, rendering your stabilization projects, your Iridium 7, your political alliances, all irrelevant by erasing the possibility of their prior existence. Your fleet's energy output is precisely the necessary catalyst to achieve the required temporal displacement shockwave. It is a calculated risk exchange, your temporary exposure versus permanent erasure. Krellin's voice suddenly broke through the secure channel from the conclave, overlaid with the panic of several subordinate sensor analysts. Lyrosol, the harvester null zone H. As accelerated, it will breach hegemony sensor range in less than 200 standard seconds. We cannot reposition the flotilla in time for kinetic deployment against this phenomenon. Dr. Thorne's assessment of the threat velocity appears accurate. The decision was agonizingly swift, a complete reversal of hegemonic caution. Fear of the known, aggressive, yet comprehensible Terran threat was instantly eclipsed by the terror of the unknown, ethereal, existential harvester. Ninth Flotilla, this is Ambassador Lyrosol, she transmitted, taking direct tactical command over the stunned military contingent. Execute immediate, full-spectrum power transfer to the Terran vessel Odyssey. Disengage all primary weapon banks and transfer all auxiliary and primary reactor output to the designated input vector on the Odyssey's hull. Prioritize the 180-second window. This is a hegemony directive. A tense silence followed. The military commanders of the flotilla, hardened veterans of border skirmishes, hesitated, their programming screaming against self-immolation. Then, from the lead vessel of the flotilla came a single, resolute transmission, cutting through the static of fear. Acknowledged, Ambassador. Power transfer sequence initiated. May logic prevail. The next few moments defied easy description, even by the sophisticated interpretive systems of the Zalosian bridge. The entire screen, previously dominated by the inert bulk of the Odyssey, was now filled with the raw, unshielded outpouring of energy from the hegemony fleet. The flotilla vessels, built to withstand the stress of warp transition and localized tactical engagements, began to strain visibly. Their hull plating glowed incandescently, not from weapon discharge, but from the impossible strain of channeling their entire generated output into an external, alien receptacle. On the Odyssey, the matte gray surface absorbed the torrent. For a moment, nothing visible happened. Then the ship began to resonate. It didn't emit light, it emitted structure. Sharp, impossible geometric patterns, toroidal shapes overlaid with impossible-to-calculate tessellations, began to overlay the hull, shimmering into existence and vanishing milliseconds later, as if the very fabric of the universe was struggling to define the ship's boundary against the massive influx of energy. Dr. Thorne's voice returned, strained now, overlaid with a high-pitched whine that indicated system stress was approaching the critical threshold. Transfer at 80% saturation. Containment fields fluctuating wildly. Ambassador, tell your fleet commanders to push past mandated safety thresholds. We need the final 20% now. We are nearing the critical moment for deployment. Lyrosol relayed the command with cold precision. The flotilla commanders responded with immediate, painful compliance. The surge increased. The leading vessels of the flotilla began exhibiting hull failures, metal warping inward as their own reactor containment struggled to keep pace with the output mandate. They were sacrificing their fleet to power the unknown defense of the Terrans. 95%. Stabilizing the resonance frequency, we have achieved the necessary harmonic lock, preparing the pulse deployment. The moment the power reached its peak, the Odyssey released the stored energy. It wasn't a beam or a bolt or an explosion. It was an instantaneous, violent expansion of space-time curvature originating from the vessel's core, propagating outward in a perfect, expanding sphere. The effect on the harvester's null zone was immediate and absolute. Where the sphere of Terran energy met the informational void, the void recoiled. It didn't dissipate, it was pushed. The edge of the nothingness snapped backward with visible force, warping the light from distant stars around the expanding Terran bubble. The impossible geometry emanating from the Odyssey was imposing a temporary, localized reality upon the harvester, forcing it to conform to a structure it could not dissolve. The energy cost was catastrophic. The Odyssey, its stabilization matrix utterly overwhelmed by the sudden, violent energy drain and the feedback from the counterwave, shuddered violently. The human avatar on the lexicon vanished, severed by the overwhelming environmental stress within the Terran ship. The pulse expanded rapidly, reaching the extent of the glacis sector, slamming into the periphery of the approaching null zone. The resulting compression wave, a purely gravitational phenomenon, threw the hegemony escort fleet hundreds of thousands of kilometers off their original trajectory, temporarily scrambling their sensor arrays into useless white noise. Then silence. Lyrosol stared at the main tactical display. The advancing null zone was gone. The background radiation levels had returned to normal, the light of the distant galaxies flowing unimpeded. The glacis sector was safe. The Ninth Flotilla, however, was crippled. Several vessels were drifting dead in space, their primary reactors fused, their hulls scarred and blackened by the strain of the output transfer. They had survived, but their offensive capability was gone. They had placed their fate entirely in the hands of a single alien vessel. And the single alien vessel, the Odyssey, was now dark. Lyrosol ordered the lexicon to approach cautiously, utilizing minimal impulse power. As they closed the distance, the terrifying, dense gray form of the Terran ship reappeared, silent and inert, its gravitational anomaly having subsided completely. It was now merely a piece of high-density debris drifting in the void, dependent on external forces for any movement. Vihor ran diagnostics. Ambassador, the Odyssey is powered down, completely, energy reserves depleted. Life support signatures are nominal, but the primary reactor core is cycling down from catastrophic overload. They utilized the Iridium-7 to stabilize the discharge, not the fuel. They executed the plan, but it cost them their propulsion entirely. They had traded their ability to move for the hegemony's ability to survive. A strange, almost ritualistic exchange had occurred. Raw power for crucial, localized stability, ending in a mutual disabling. Lyrosol ordered a small, highly specialized maintenance probe, a biocontainment unit disguised as a diagnostic drone, to approach the Odyssey and establish a minimal tether, prepared to extract the human crew if life support failed. Minutes later, the drone established a secure, shielded connection to the Terran vessel's primary airlock. A pre-programmed sequence initiated on the Odyssey's external controls. The hatch cycled open. The maintenance probe entered the alien vessel, relaying the internal environment back to the lexicon. The interior was Spartan, functional, and eerily quiet. The gravity appeared normalized, suggesting the ship's internal systems were running on minimal emergency power. The drone found the cockpit. There were no complex consoles or shimmering control interfaces typical of advanced species. There was only a single molded seat facing forward, designed perfectly for the human form, and resting on the primary control surface, directly where Dr. Thorne's hands would have been positioned, was a small, sealed data core, the final installment of the Terran exchange. Lyrosol ordered the data core retrieved. As the probe docked and secured the core, the drone's optical sensors registered a final item in the cockpit. A small, crude, hand-drawn image etched onto a piece of durable polymer, affixed near the primary viewport. It was a depiction of 3 distinct, vastly different star systems grouped together under a single, stylized banner. It was a map, not of where they had come from, but where they were going, and who they were bringing with them. Back in the Grand Conclave Hall, the atmosphere was no longer one of fear, but of monumental, dizzying change. Krellin received Lyrosol's report detailing the destruction of the Null Zone, the crippling of the Hegemony fleet, and the inert state of the Odyssey. The Council listened in stunned silence as the final Terran data package was decrypted and analyzed by the Hegemony's finest xenolinguists and physicists. The package contained the promised blueprints for advanced atmospheric filtration and frictionless levitation, gifts that would revolutionize energy distribution and environmental health across dozens of dependent worlds. But it also contained the true explanation for the Odyssey's construction and its desperate flight. "Sensor," announced the lead xenolinguist, transmitting his findings with barely controlled urgency. "The Terran data reveals that their entire high-technology arc, the development of zero-point manipulation and temporal physics, was not a product of internal competition or gradual evolution. It was a targeted, singular effort initiated immediately after they detected a deep space, repeating signal." Krellin leaned forward, his ancient form seeming to straighten under the weight of this new revelation. "A signal? From whom?" "From beyond the recognized boundaries of this galaxy, Sensor. The signal is not a communication. It is a warning. The Terrans call the source the silence beyond the veil. They extrapolated that the Harvester entities are merely the advanced scouts, the harvesters of a much larger organized intelligence that systematically eliminates any rising civilization capable of breaching a certain technological threshold. The threshold is the manipulation of vacuum energy itself." The political fear that had dominated the Council evaporated, replaced by a universal, species-wide comprehension of true cosmic peril. The Hegemony had been worried about resource wars and border disputes. The Terrans had been fighting an interstellar war of survival against an intelligence that viewed emerging technological life as a pollutant to be scrubbed from. The universe. The Odyssey, the xenolinguist continued, his voice trembling with the magnitude of the discovery, was built as an emergency escape pod designed to jump across the void and hide among older, more established powers, hoping the sheer bulk and energy signature of a coalition like ours would mask its critical vulnerability. They didn't want our resources, they wanted our obscurity. Krellin looked at the schematic of the 3 stars drawn by Dr. Thorne, and the drawing, the banner. It is a strategic alliance proposal, censor. A plea. The 3 star systems depicted, the Terran system, and 2 other minor systems within the hegemony's periphery that the Terrans had briefly observed, represent their best estimate for a shielded, defensible staging ground. They are proposing a unified front, not against the hegemony, but with the hegemony to prepare for the true enemy. The scale had shifted violently. The hegemony's entire political structure, built on the slow, careful management of known variables, was suddenly rendered obsolete by a species that had stared extinction in the face and built a ship that could cheat reality to escape it. Humans, underestimated as volatile primitives, had not only survived the immediate crisis, but had done so by offering the hegemony the key to their own survival against a greater existential foe. Ambassador Lyrosol, Krellin commanded, his voice regaining its resonant power, now imbued with a sense of shared destiny rather than political apprehension. Recall the lexicon immediately. Initiate full data integration of the Terran technological package. Accelerate the development of the regenerative matrices for the Zalosian caste, and deploy the frictionless levitation principles to all major hegemony energy conduits. We will stabilize the 9th flotilla through conventional means, and then transfer them to the periphery under heavy guard. He paused, gazing at the projection of the inert Odyssey, the ship that had nearly destroyed them through its impossible physics, yet simultaneously saved them from absolute annihilation. And the Terran crew aboard that vessel, Krellin continued, a profound philosophical shift evident in his tone. They have risked their lives, willingly surrendered their mobility, and provided us with the means to defend ourselves against a threat we were entirely ignorant of. They have proven themselves worthy of integration, not as subjects, but as essential allies. Krellin turned to the assembled council, the violet light of the hall illuminating the seriousness in his posture. We have feared the unpredictable nature of the Terrans. We failed to realize that their unpredictability was merely the visible byproduct of a desperate, ruthless, and ultimately ethical drive for systemic survival. They used a dangerous ship to survive a larger danger. Their methods are terrifying, but their intent, when stripped of aggressive posturing, is fundamentally sound. He made the final declaration, the one that would redefine the hegemony for the next 1,000 millennia. The political structure of the coalition must be reformed. The Terran Directorate and its remaining operational assets are to be afforded full membership status within the Hegemony Council. We must learn from those who understand how to survive annihilation. We will prepare our defenses against the silence beyond the veil. The war that was intended to take human lives has instead forged an alliance that might save us all. The crystalline hall echoed with the unified resonance of agreement. The hegemony, which had spent epochs mastering order, now placed its trust in the chaotic brilliance born from near-total collapse. Humanity, the species that dared to wield physics others deemed theoretical folly, had shown them the true nature of the darkness lurking just beyond the edge of the known universe, forcing the old galactic order to look up, look out, and finally, prepare for a conflict waged not for territory, but for the very right to exist within the cosmic framework. The age of hegemonic complacency was over. The age of desperate, unified survival had begun, all thanks to a single, dangerous ship and the stubborn, brilliant people who sailed it.